Testing 1, 2. Okay, I'm gonna give this thing a try. Yeah, first time using OBS and first time doing a live stream, so we will see how this goes. But yeah, welcome. Looks like we've already got a few folks who've joined, and I'm still getting all my OBS scenes together. So it looks like I have got this welcome screen, and it looks like I have cool. I've got Excellidraw in place as well. How's everybody doing today? Very cool. Well, I think I'm going to be able to take questions from the chat. I think you might have to be a subscriber to chime in. It may not be the case. There's also a delay from my video to what I'm seeing. And so, oh, louder. Let me see what I can do with that. Cool. See, you get to be alpha testers on this. Let's see if that helps. Testing 1, 2. Good. Volume louder, maybe. Awesome. Well, awesome. Yeah. So I think that should help, and we'll go from there. Also, I'm here for open discussion topics. Otherwise, I'll probably just like dive into something that's interesting to me, and y'all can be along for the ride. So either way, yeah, lots of cool stuff. We actually just finished recording. Okay, cool. Thank you. We just finished recording our latest episode of Book Overflow this morning, which we're covering Frictionless, which is the new book by Abby Noda, who's from DX, and Nicole Forsgren, who, super famous in the DevOps community and as part of Accelerate and a bunch of Dora and Space, and also involved with DX. Okay, good. Of 1 minute to chat. Okay, interesting. That's good to know. Only subscribers can. Okay. Yeah, I think that was some default settings that I had in place. I will be happy to take feedback on the best way to structure this. So yeah. Again, all this stuff's brand new for me, but I thought it would be a fun thing to do, especially if there's cool topics. I think one of the topics I was looking at hopping into was, I guess, one of my favorite things in CI/CD pipelines, which is I think counterintuitive to a lot of folks, but something that I've ended up finding out is like a technical implementation that's also just like sort of a cool data structure, which is hash-based. Some projects call them tree hashes, and some of them are, they're sort of like a dependency solver, so that you don't have to rebuild and redeploy containers in a pipeline, especially if you're using something like a monorepo. And so I don't know, diving into that might be kind of interesting, but also just happy to hit any topics that folks are finding interesting as well. Yeah, so I guess what we can do is pop into here, and yeah, well, welcome to the small but dedicated early adopters to see what this live stream's all about. So yeah, again, I really appreciate it. So yeah, maybe I'll spend some time drawing on some stuff just to kind of get things ready while we go. So yeah, just quick overview. This is an open discussion, office hours. Y'all are welcome to chime in on anything that you think might be interesting or you'd like my perspective on, and it's open to discuss. Like I said earlier, I'm brand new to using OBS and live streaming, so this is all very new to me, but it's also like a fun learning experience. And yeah, I have some ideas of some things that we can use to kick off conversations. But yeah, I'm here to answer questions or dive into something technical that would be interesting to folks. Is there a live voice chat? Oh yeah. So this is interesting. I wish I need to like do some more investigation on live voice chat. I was writing up something. Oh no, went over the character limit. Huh. Yeah, there's some delays, and then there's also character limit stuff. So I'll dig into that. So yeah, bear with me. So yeah, one of the things that I run into a lot, actually, I was just talking to somebody who was building out Argo CD for the first time. He's getting into like sort of the DevOps world, and thinking about how we do versioning and thinking about how we have assets, especially if we're in a repo, and let's say, that you might see something. There's lots of ways to do this, but maybe we have projects and we have app A, app B, and app C, right? So we have these different applications, and they typically have this sort of relationship there. I'll check in with the chat, and we want these projects to be maybe if this is a service oriented architecture, you want these projects to sort of have independent deployability, right? The team working on app A, the team working on app B should have deployment pipelines that don't require rebuilding everything. You want to hopefully like minimize dependencies across them. And so I've seen a few people struggle with this, which is actually kind of interesting, right? By default, you might try to reach for something like this, where I have, version 1.1.1, right? But versioning gets weird, right? Versioning gets weird here because what are we versioning 1.1.1? And if I label this, am I atomically saying that app A, app B, and app C are all version 1.1.1 of the repo? If I have atomic versioning, but maybe we have a dependency graph that goes something like this, and the entire repo goes to this, we're going through this sort of versioning here, we start to break down, right? So if I'll put it this way. And why semantic versioning is sort of broken at the repo level if you're doing a monorepo. And this is like just an anti-pattern that I ran into. Folks who don't do this, I think, this may look pretty obvious to you that this is not the way to do it, because the question would be like, what is app A? What is app B and app C? And so sometimes you will maybe reference this version, but maybe app C is on version 1.3, and this ends up becoming a really tangled mess, because you start building an app that references itself at some point in the past, right? It sort of defeats the purpose of using a monorepo. And so this idea of inward-facing semantic versioning ends up being super bad, right? And we don't want this. This is a sort of an anti-pattern. A lot of times I like to say that semantic versioning is it's a way of making a promise to like outside parties. And so there's actually like a much cooler way of doing versioning internally that is derived from the content itself. And before I dive into that, I'm going to go ahead and check the comments really quick. Okay, currently use branch in a repo. Okay, this is great. So let me read over. Topic, currently use branch in repo to build RPM to push to test servers. Want to have Docker containers to test local before push. However, some apps have requirements on Ceph or on OpenStack. Oh, interesting. So there's like dependencies on some shared services stuff. How do we set up Docker in code for these dependencies? I don't want to have a Ceph setup, OpenStack setup. We program and go. Sorry, thinking of the character limit. Ooh, this is an interesting one. Cool. I'm gonna finish my thought on this first section so we can put a bow on it, and then we'll dig into that, because I think this will be really fun to talk about. So what I'm a big fan of here is what I would consider like consistent internal versioning, right? So if we think of like change management as this timeline, right? This is I'll label this. This is our Git. Let's see. This is our Git repo, right? And then this is over time. So let's say, this is our commit history. We have a commit, right? And do these moments over time. And then Git repo, we'll say over time. What I would like to be able to do is to derive what the A, B, and C should be internally consistent, meaning I should be able to go to any moment in this timeline, and I should be able to ask the build solver to take the current state of the application code and to verify that some sort of change management process needs to take place, right? And so if we have this, and at this point in time, let me see if I can do this. And what we have an identifier of the entire system, right? Which is this Git hash. In each one of these, let me write this down real quick. So, let's say we have a hash that's, this hash. And, what is this hash telling us? This hash is telling us that it's the content address of all of the data that's in here, right? This is a hash that's derived from all of the lines of code in my repository. But what I'm also interested in is what sometimes is called the tree hash, right? And so at this point in time, I should be able to, and these are problems that like Bazel and some other tools, Dagger and some other things are really good at, is that a tree hash should be able to take all the code inside of app A and its dependency graph. So let's say app A depends on some shared library or whatever, I should be able to take the entire dependency graph and create a hash of just app A's state at that point in time, app B's state at that point in time, and app C's state at that point in time. Now, if I move on the timeline to this hash of all projects, that's a unique snapshot of everything. But if, say, in this commit, C has a, maybe we start here and then let's see, app C has a delta. So we'll put a little, mark here for delta. Oops. There we go. So C changes, but A and B do not, right? Our build pipelines should be able to be smart enough to say, okay, no code has changed in app B, and so therefore there's no deployable artifact change as well. I should be able to do a comparison and say, get the hash of app B. Is this app of hash B registered in, let's say, the Docker registry? If it is, great. I don't need to rebuild it. I might just add the annotation to this hash as well, because we can have multiple tags on this Docker container. And so what's kind of cool about this is that I can actually do a lookup table and say, give me all containers by this hash, right? Which would tell me at this point in time that these are all here. But I can also ask for any container by the hash of its content, of its dependency graph, which means that over time, C builds a new container from this commit to this commit, but A and B don't. All they do is do an annotation update to their tag of their Docker container. And this is two things, right? Number one, it makes it much more efficient in my build processes. I don't have to rebuild a bunch of stuff. I get these sort of deterministic builds here. And then I also can see that, the only thing that's changed. And now when I suck up this change into something like Argo CD, the only deployable event that comes out of this is a change management cycle to app C, right? App A and B didn't have to get rebuilt. They didn't have any sort of change management cycle, and you just have like a much cleaner boundary. And so anyway, once you see this, it seems incredibly obvious, and you would say, why would I do it any other way? But I always like to bring this up because it's always surprising to me when people haven't thought about hashing inside of not just at the get level, but also hashing inside of dependency graphs on top of that. So let me catch up on stuff that's in here. Some related services, MySQL. Okay, cool. We also have a failover controller. Regarding my biggest concern that pipeline builds. My setup is only execute builds, test, etc. for app A if only files in that project have been changed. However, version catalogs are typically central to what they all share in the versions. And if app A updates a dep, that means that the merge request will have to retest every app. Any better practices here? So this is interesting to think about. I always try to play a game. We always try to play the game, which is like, how can I update the dependency graph in the least expensive way possible, right? So if app A, this is a good thing to have here, right? We should really try to minimize, for instance, we really don't want something like this to have happen, right? Where we say app B relies on app A. Sometimes you have to, right? But the more decoupled that we can have these services, the better. The same thing with dependency graphs on something like a library. So if we have like a shared library, that it gets updated and then it feeds down into app A and app B and app C, that's, I would say, is an expensive change. Sometimes you have to do it that way, right? Sometimes that's really the only way that's possible. The good thing about that pain of A, B, and C all having to be rebuilt is that we now lean on our build pipelines to prove that we don't have things like diamond dependencies. We don't have issues in which C has lagged behind on something that both A and C have a shared underlying dependency, and chasing this across repos. So there are paths in which you can have these sort of like existential rebuilds, and you should be really careful about what those are. I think that that's more about an organizational structure idea of like, do we really need a shared library across your projects? It might be that it's super important, like certain mission critical security libraries or something. But a lot of times what you end up having is a distributed monolith where really app A and app C should be one app, and you're kind of treating them as separate things, but they're not really, right? So I would say that that's a code smell typically. But again, everything's a trade-off. So you never know. I've been in organizations where we needed to have a central module, and we had to deal with the pain of this expensive build. But a lot of times we've played the game of like how loosely coupled can we make the system. But yeah, great question. And if you have follow-ups, I'm happy to answer this as well. In the meantime, let me go back to the topic that you brought up, DJ. And so here we go. The topic is, let's see if I can copy this. Maybe I can I copy? Yeah. Try to copy this and then see if I can get this in here. So let me go down here and cool. So currently we use a branch in the repo to build RPM. Let's get the rest of this. Continued. How do we set up Docker in the code for these dependencies? Oops, This is where y'all get to bear with me. Oh no, these are separate. I'm just gonna read it. I think it'll be easier for me just to summarize. So, let's go back to the topic. Cool. Currently, we use a branch in the repo to build RPM to push to test servers. We want to have Docker container to test local before the push. However, some apps have requirements on Ceph or OpenStack. And so for the uninitiated, Ceph is like it's a cluster file system, and sort of a distributed file system that's really quite common in Kubernetes infrastructure, and then an OpenStack setup. Let's see, we program in Go. Some related services are MySQL backed services, and we run all the servers. We have Ceph dependencies for storage. We also have a failover to the control plane, which reach out to OpenStack. Also reach out MySQL servers running on an agent API endpoint regarding mono. Okay, and so interesting. And so the tests that you want to run, we have Docker container to test local before we push. So again, without knowing more, and maybe we can pull this up in chat, I wonder, it's really important, especially for testing, that you can abstract away those dependencies. Like obviously you don't want to have to do local end-to-end testing, right? Spinning up like a Ceph or, the OpenStack stuff. A lot of times all I'll end up trying to do is encapsulate what in the business logic, like what are we doing to interact with Ceph, right? Is it some sort of is there some storage interface that I can put in an in-memory storage replacement, or these other pieces? And let me reread just to make sure that I understand which parts of this you're trying to test. Use branch and repo. You want to have Docker container to test local before you push. However, some apps have requirements on Ceph. Yeah, so what I would really try to push here is that like, typically if I have some really like direct dependency on some external piece, that's a code smell. And I try to figure out, is there some sort of like clean wrapper to encapsulate the actions that I'm trying to do with this without having to like have the implementation details in place, and again, without knowing all of the details of what's going on there. That's typically the right interface to have. I did this. Okay, here's a good example. I did this recently. I was writing a test suite for some JavaScript stuff that I was working on, and it's very common in JavaScript to just have like a I imported the DB client, and it was outside of the scope of the functions. It was just calling the DB client from the like library import. It made it super hard to test, right? I would either have to have like a full-on database. I would have to have a full-on database that I was pulling in, and then worrying about state management and transactions and all these other things, or I could pass in the DB client as another argument in the function, understanding what these things are going to be, and I could hot swap that database for, either SQLite or maybe even a local Postgres per, test that I'm running, or something that's lightweight, that's not an assumption on my like larger piece. It just made the testing much more like easy to wrap my head around. And then I could decide, do I want to fake? Do I want to mock? Do I want to actually have like a full-on database with a bunch of state that's inside of it? That's typically the direction that I would be going to try to talk to the engineering team and figure out the right way of solving that problem. Obviously, I don't know the inner workings of what you have there, but I guess if we're going to talk about this in like an abstract way, this is sort of this idea that I have some sort of external system. Maybe it's a DB or storage, right? In this case, maybe it's Ceph. We'll do Postgres, right? And so my application logic, if I'm tightly coupled, I might be calling in some exact Postgres driver or some exact Ceph driver, right, in my code. And so let's say, I'm calling this like PG client or something, right? And then maybe I have like, Ceph client, whatever, right? I have these things. And, these are opinionated. And I would say actually another one that's pretty common is like Datadog, right? People use, actually maybe Datadog's a good one to talk about, where I'll use the Datadog SDK, right? I see this a lot where people are pulling this in, and then Datadog's all of a sudden it's like super embedded in your application, and we'll call this your application logic. So these things are here, but if I do this, actually, you know what? Let me take a step back and make sure I'm heading the right direction on this. Multi-versions of MySQL instead of, gosh. So then we do locally to make things much quicker. Yeah. So let's see. Hopefully I'm answering this in the right direction. So like, I'll take a step back here and we'll actually just solve for, I'm going to use a toy example and we'll just solve for this. I end up doing this a lot where the code for Datadog, people do the good thing, which is they decide that they want to have good logs and metrics and telemetry in their application. But then they do the bad thing, which is they directly engage the Datadog SDK. And the reason I call it the bad thing is because you might decide to change your mind on the Datadog SDK one day. And so you might want something else, right? What is better in this case is to use this sort of like what I would call, some people call it inversion of control. Some people call it dependency injection. I'm not advocating that you actually have to use a, an actual dependency injection library for this, but there's a couple of approaches, and I'd say from like a maturity standpoint, you might try this, right? So I might call this the logging. So I might call this logging, right? And then I implement the Datadog SDK, Datadog SDK. Happens to be like a provider of this thing. And so like what I do is I have my logging thing. The logging thing is what the rest of my code is using. And then the Datadog SDK, sort of lives inside of here. And that is now going back and talking to Datadog, and this stuff is happening. So that my application logic is talking to this like logging interface or whatever. I can say, log.info. And it just so happens that when I start up my server, I implement the Datadog SDK in there. You can actually take this a step further, and I would say like this is the pattern that is going even better now, which is that I don't use this. Instead, I'm actually going with the OTel library, which is just like a standard set of things, standard set of practices that we have, and then I have some sort of OTel collector that this thing goes and pushes to, like this. And then the OTel collector then can choose to talk to Datadog, right? And so this is sort of like the more, Kubernetes native thing, which is that like, I have no idea where this data is actually going to ship off to. There's no concept of it whatsoever. I just used OpenTelemetry. It's the open standard. Maybe tell it, how to get to the OTel collector. The OTel collector maybe sits as a daemon set or it sits in a centralized place. And then the collector is the one that's responsible for sending things off to Datadog, right? And so now we can make all kinds of new decisions. So like maybe I decide that I don't want Datadog. I want to use the, I want to use, Grafana Cloud. And so the cool thing here is I don't have to have any runtime changes. I literally I could add a sync and dual ship, right, for some period of time, or I can do these things. And so obviously this is very purpose built for the logging stuff, but you can imagine a world in which, we at least encapsulate what Ceph is doing inside of some library that abstracts this out. And the reason, again, we bring this up is that maybe I want to have, something else here that is the standard out provider, and the standard out provider just logs to standard out, right? So logging can pull up the standard out provider, or it could use the Datadog SDK. My business logic doesn't have to change. And then again, use OTel, and these things can go out this way. Let's see. Something to do locally. So hopefully that makes sense. Version catalogs are typically central. Yeah, interesting. I hope I took that into the right direction. I can always go back and reread to see if I'm missing the mark, but I think that should get you in a good direction. Let's see, we repo to build RPM to push to test servers. We use a branch in repo to build RPM to push to test servers. We won't have Docker container to test local. Yeah, if the requirement is that you don't want to have Ceph and you don't want to have OpenStack dependencies, what you're testing needs to be abstracted enough so that I can hot swap them with something else, right? It can have no opinion about the infrastructure. And I would say as much as possible, you want your application to not know or care. I think it was Neil Ford, when we had him on talking about foundations of software architecture, they called this orthogonal coupling, right? Our platform team, and maybe we can share this here. The platform team, let's see if I can, there we go. This is the platform. Platform team decides, right, that we have this OTel collector and that we're going to be shipping the stuff off here. And then the application team, right, they get to decide this. They get to decide, whatever's running inside of here. The contract is we expect you to ship to an OTel collector, right? The platform team says we expect you to ship to an OTel collector. We're going to give you, let's say, some service discovery endpoint or something. And so as long as you allow us to set that in as an environment variable, the application team can just, go to town, do whatever they want. And then the handoff of metrics and spans and all this other stuff goes there, right? So we'll call this the application team. And this is so that we can, reduce cognitive load, right? all I have to do is worry about my application. I know that if I use the OTel library or whatever, these will show up. And if I go to my dashboard, it'll be there, right? I don't have to think about all of this stuff. Like, oh, did we update to the latest version of Datadog SDK? Or do we understand what breaking changes are in Ceph? Like, ideally, those things are going to be sort of outside of what you have going on. So having something we do locally would make things so much quicker. Yeah, I got to using interfaces. Yep. Exactly. So interfaces in Go specifically are a superpower, right? So one of my favorite things, and I guess we can show this. Go IO dot reader, right? One of the most powerful things in Go, and I think this is worth bringing up, is these single argument interfaces. And let's see if I can find. Where is there's the write to, writer, reader. Yeah, type reader, right? So one of the most beautiful things in Go, I think, is something that Russ Cox has sort of like discovered after they wrote the language. At least my understanding, he's credited to it, right? Go is big on these, right? So there's the IO reader, a very simple interface that says, as long as you read and you have a set of bytes, and that you return this function signature of like the integer and error, which is the number of bytes read and then an error. Anything that fulfills this interface will work, right? And so I don't have to know anything about the implementation details of a reader. I just know as long as that thing implements read, you're good to go. And I actually have let's see, let me see if I can pull this up. I'm going to open up another browser really quickly so that let's see, logging. Let's see, Go error handling, bring your own interface. Yeah, here we go. This is a great one. So this is my friend Jeffrey who wrote this blog post, and it's one that I really like. It's one worth sharing. You know what? I'll go ahead and put it in the chat. Let me pull this up. Where's OBS? Here we go. Nope. Do I paste? So this is a great one where he has this, like, not all interfaces have the elegant sort of like single, interface, which I think is very powerful because how large it is. But he has this this is like a good example of using a logger, right? These are all of the things that he cares about using a logger. And so he's a big fan of structured logging. And so, he used logRS and then Zap and then ZeroLog. But now logging is built into the standard library, right? Well, what's cool about this is that by defining this interface, he's able to do implementations of this, right? So he made a Zap logger, which fulfills all the contracts, right? So there's this with values. And then he likes to do this by convention, which I think is pretty cool. I think it's a good trade-off. Is he'll make this config and there'll be a provide logger. And by, this has this ability to, there's this no op logger. He's got the ZeroLog logger. He's got the Zap logger, and you can easily extend this out to slog, right? And what he was able to do is, without having to change any of the rest of his business logic, when he's ready to introduce a new logger, he can add a new case. And he can choose the log provider that's passed in, and then that's what gets instantiated, right? This is a pattern. I think I've seen this elsewhere with some talks over at Uber. Talked about this years ago, about how they do something similar where they might default to the no-op logger just so there's not muddying things up. But when you think this way in interfaces, it becomes super powerful because now you just talk about interacting with this thing the way the shape of the data, right? The shape of the functions and the interactions and the methods is the thing that you're interacting with. And then you have all the power in the world to do a swap and replace. I've done this before where I had some requirements with file systems, and there are some really nice like file system testing libraries where you can force a lot of stuff to do this. And so, yeah, I think that should be helpful. I think another thing that's nice to look at if you want to look for prior art is the HTTP test library. Was it test/HTTP Golang? What's it called again? I always forget the name of it. Oh, yeah. Here it is. It's net HTTP test. And, testing your HTTP servers is like not the easiest thing in the world to do, right? You think about like, how do I actually get all of these things in place? And one of the nice things about Go, they have a really powerful sort of batteries included standard library. And so, looking at the prior art of folks that are building some serious software is a good example, right? If I have this sort of HTTP test suite here, I can do all kinds of really powerful stuff where, we have this, you can test routes and push things in and do all these like really powerful things that are part of it. And I have a feeling that if you're doing stuff that's like pretty domain specific to like Ceph and some other stuff, leaning on something like the HTTP test library is, worthwhile. So, yeah, hopefully that helps. These are great questions though. And I think a lot of what we're end up doing is how do we detangle, right? How do we take something that's somewhat complex and then make it so that we can reason about it? And I think that's well worth it to spend some time thinking about it. Awesome. Well, does anybody else have any questions that they want to bring up? Hopefully that was able to answer and address this. I really have no idea how long the latency is, but I think it's actually pretty large. I'm wondering if I have some sort of broadcast delay setting that I could change on my side, because I wish that this was easier feedback loop, because I think when I'm talking about stuff, it's like pretty decent time lapse that goes by. But yeah. Very cool. I'm trying to think of something. Oh, I've been working on something that's been interesting. I've got some data warehousing stuff that has come up. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Do that. Okay, good. Not too bad. Great. I've been working on some data warehousing stuff where we have we have a very clear SDLC concept of like, we have production data, obviously, that needs to stay in the production environment, but we also have data that we're consuming from the outside world. Maybe public data from state and local government, or maybe data from like a data feed like, realtor.com or Redfin or something, where we want to ingest this in some efficient way, but we actually want to make this available across environments. And so we don't actually have this strong, maybe it's bad if you took that. Yeah. Yeah. I think it is actually pretty long. So I don't understand. I'll have to see about doing some testing stuff, but I think the latency is like 30 seconds or something. Yep. Place them beforehand. I think that's a great idea. So it'll be good. Gathering the topics beforehand, get people to participate even if they can't actually make it, and that way I can answer questions as we go. And I could even, if it's got some good visuals, I can go ahead and prep those as well. So I think that's a really good idea. But yeah, so like one of the things that we're looking at is using some tools like Databricks to help us understand these more modern patterns around like a data mesh, or how do we ingest data and then make it available across environments where that's appropriate versus something that is sensitive and the pipeline itself needs to go through a dev staging or production. And so this has been a fun thing for me to think about, because I typically have worked in environments where we have a very clear SDLC process where dev, staging, environment, and in prod are never sort of crossing over. But now we have this data ingest where the data product itself is sort of like a separate service, and that separate service is being ingested into the organization. And it's been fun to think about. So I like it when I get to do something that stretches the boundaries of my knowledge, and I get to do research on who's done it before me. And that's actually been a really fun thing for using AI tools, right? So I'm a big fan of using large language models if there's a bounded context. And so putting it on a research project that says, here's the patterns that I have, here's what I think would be a good process. Can you give me examples of organizations that follow this pattern? I'd like to know what the major providers like Snowflake and Databricks and Azure and AWS all have prior art on, and case studies and things like this. Yeah, the ability to call in would also be great. I actually think that would be, this is really good feedback. I appreciate all of y'all bearing with me on this first call. I want to try to do this on a regular cadence, and I think a call in would be good, and I think gathering up topics beforehand would be good. So yeah, I appreciate this feedback. I'm also going to try to figure out the latency issue on my side so that we can make this a little more real time. And yeah, who knows? Maybe we can piggyback off of, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe there's a way to do voice chat that is trusted. I don't know. We'll dive into it. But yeah, I appreciate y'all bearing with me. I think the potential to have the ability to call in, yeah, that would be really cool. And if I get like hazed by somebody on a prank call, that would be like a really fun thing too, to see what kind of crazy stuff people say. Broadly, if there's new topics, any tool would generally recommend in projects. Bot to stay up to date, something like that. Oh yeah, that's a cool idea too. I was talking to I think I was talking to actually Carter from Book Overflow, and he had an idea that I thought was interesting, and I would be surprised if it doesn't exist somewhere. But it's literally a backlog bot that would just sit there and look at your backlog for things that it thought it could contribute on. Maybe it's been sitting there a long time in the backlog, or maybe you could tag it a certain way to be a good candidate for the backlog bot, and just kind of, help look at little things like that. I think if we can get more narrowly scoped tasks instead of big all-encompassing tasks, I think that these kind of these little bots would be really cool. Like you let them be these little simple, almost like Unix philosophy, large language model bots that reduce the potential risks that they have, make it really easy to see the change management process over time. I think that'd be really neat. Be really, really neat. Yeah, I do wonder what the feedback loop is. You know what? I might be able to see this. I'm going to do a thumbs up. Yeah, I think it's like 18 seconds. So I just counted. I just watched the stream I have open. It was about 18 seconds. So it's and that's me counting in my head. So maybe 15 seconds in reality. But that's a huge latency. So I don't know. If I had to guess, I have that set up in YouTube somewhere. Yep. Isn't that funny? Took so long for it to show up. Wow. Well, we get to learn this together. And, this is part of the building in public. I'm trying to get out of my comfort zone and actually see what's going on. But yeah, I feel very fortunate. As some of y'all know, I've recently started this consulting business again. I guess officially it was the end of November, and I feel very lucky. I've already got some fractional work and some project-based work. Do I keep an engineering journal, and how do you keep the habit? I am a horrible person to ask about this. I try to keep an engineering journal. When I'm on my best days, I do. I'm really good about starting an engineering journal when I'm starting new projects. And then I think I'm scatterbrained enough that I get undisciplined. So I wish I could tell you I'm a meticulous engineering journal keeper. I have realized if it keep the friction low and I do something in which if I have a ritual where I review it the next day, I've been using, sometimes I'll use Obsidian. I like Obsidian a lot. Things being in Markdown is really great for lots of reasons, especially because of large language models as well. I've also been in environments where I used Notion and just had a private Notion space, depending on the thing. I've been using Obsidian more recently, just as a way to browse files, but I'll use Claude Code and even Claude Cowork increasingly to help me sort of, I'll actually do this too. If I'm doing a long-term session, I will get it to brain dump stuff that would be a good candidate to put in my engineering journal. It's like, again, another nice way to do that. But I always like to put it in my own words. Just, it's an important thinking exercise. Latency is a skill you will develop. Nice. Yeah. But yeah. How about you? Are you keeping an engineering journal? I definitely have a bigger paper trail. So even when I get lazy with it, at least I have stuff just as we're using more agentic things. But what I typically do with my engineering journals, so I'll do this for journaling in general. I do keep, I read a book over the holidays, and he talked about making a list of the 3 things that you want to get done the next day. These are the sort of the 3 things that must get done. So you obviously want to get more than 3 things done, but these are if I don't get anything else done, get these 3 things done. And it could be recording this session, right? It doesn't have to be some huge Herculean thing. It's just get this thing done. It's one of the 3 things. If I look back on this day, it's one of the 3 things I'll think about. And so the 3 things I intend to get done the next day. And then I keep a record of the things I actually got done that day. And that's just a daily ritual that I do to kind of hold myself accountable and think just a little bit in advance of how do I push things forward. That typically will also feed into the engineering journal work too, right? So there's a little bit of introspection, and what you end up doing is you have this time at the end of the day is typically before I go to bed or before I turn off screens or whatever. I'll kind of put my 3 things down, what I intend to do for the next day, and make sure that I've captured the rest of the stuff that I needed. But during the day, if I'm doing things well and I'm keeping stuff, if it's important, I'll try to just kind of keep track of that during that. Yeah, the Zettelkasten note-taking. So I need to spend time with the Zettelkasten method. I know of it. I have friends who are huge into it. There's people in the Discord who have brought it up as well. Yeah, I should. I will. I can commit to at least taking another glance at it, over the weekend and see if it's resonating with me. If it's too much structure, I'll end up getting lost in it just because I'm going in a lot of different directions. But it's also, it's worth investing in your tools, in your tooling, and processes like that are important too, for sure. Those Discord people too. Those Discord people. Yeah. I think a decent number of y'all are those Discord people. So yeah, this is, I don't know, this has been interesting. It's been a good experiment. I think I've learned a lot from today, and I think that this will be exciting to come up with more real-time stuff. So figuring out what the latency problem was, but also figuring out other ways that we can interact, maybe getting on a voice call part to this. That would be a lot of fun. Yes, yes. I recognize you, some guy. DJ, I don't know your name on here versus the other, but I know you from the content you're posting, and so I can go reconcile that. So that'll be fun. That'll be cool. But yeah. But cool. I mean, I think this was fun for me. I hope that y'all got some stuff out of this, and we'll work on getting more, prepped content in place. Yeah, cool. Good. You like the idea of the office hours. Good. Well, I'll keep working on improving this because I think this would be a fun way to get more lively discussion, push me to be accountable on stuff. And then, I like the idea of gathering the questions before. Yeah, gathering the questions before so that some of these things would be really beneficial to have, reference links and pre-drawn sketches, or at least me think about it before I'm drawing the sketches out, and then we can go from there. So that's awesome. Well, I'm gonna wrap up office hours a couple minutes early today, unless y'all have any other feedback. Since there is like a 15 to 20-second latency, I will give you time to say otherwise. Otherwise, we will take what we learned from today, and we will do lots of other fun things to build on this. Because I like it. I think it's nice to have something that's more interactive, especially with the community, since Book Overflow has a good overlap with this, and then just have a place to discuss and talk about new things. So awesome. Well, thanks everybody, and talk to you soon. And I'll send out invites to the next one. So.